Hello everyone tuning in. My name is Lugrock, and I am a concert manager for several pony conventions. Send a quick picture. I would like questions. Alright, so, if you can see my screen, that was a little snippet of the Ponyville Ciderfest 2019 Super Band from the second night of the concert. So, this is Tales of a Concert Manager, and what I'm going to do is run you guys through how I put together a concert from basically the moment I find out that I'm accepted to be the manager all the way to the very end of the last night of the convention concerts. The neural net stage in the Discord should be open for questions. So I'm going to do a presentation for the first part, and then, afterwards, whatever time's left, I'll talk about stories and answer questions. But if you guys have any questions as I'm going through, if you want me to clarify something, go ahead and throw a question in there, and I will try to address it. All right, so when I'm managing a concert, the first thing I do is I make a Google Doc, and I will incorporate, or I'll have usually the head of AV, the con chair, and anyone else who is sort of important to what I'm doing be a part. They have the link for that doc. This one, I've sort of made a redacted version of the final one from Ciderfest 19. I took out any kind of sensitive information because we really don't need that floating out there. But I wanted you guys to get an idea of sort of what it looks like when I'm putting stuff together. So the first thing that happens is applications are open. Sometimes I'll get to go through and kind of edit the questions ahead of time so that I make sure that all the information I want is included. And then once they finally close, I get an Excel spreadsheet of all the responses that came in. And then inevitably, as soon as it closes, someone will message me and say, hey, I forgot to apply. Can I apply? And then I reopen it for 10 minutes, and then they apply. And you know who you are. There's a lot of people who you are, but you know who you are. In any case, once I have all the applications, then I can start to go through them and sort them. So I'm going to go through sort of the general application responses. Obviously, I took out names of performers and anything that might really give them away. But I get that information. And then they also include, sort of their resume, where they've played before. Logo and bio is sort of administrative stuff. The people who put together the con booklets use that kind of information. The information that I really care about is how long a performer can perform, as well as what kind of compensation is needed, and if they have any extra, comments or anything that they felt was pertinent for me to know. That's the kind of stuff that I care about. And so once I sort of have all the applications in place, I will put together a page and sort of, it used to be that there were musician names in here. I've whited them out for the time being just to keep things private, but I'll sort of divvy them up based on what kind of performance they would have. So, if you've got bands or just general vocalists, they go in the acoustic section. DJs are pretty straightforward. They go in the DJs. And then sometimes you'll have cool hybrid acts where you wouldn't really consider them acoustic, but they're definitely not working a controller and being DJs. This can be like hip-hop type performers, as well as just sort of acts that it's very difficult to classify. And they make it, they add a lot of diversity to performances. And one of the things I do is I try to keep it fairly even with the different types of acts that that play. And so this sort of helps me keep it straightforward. And then I'll use lookups on other tabs so that I can reference exactly who does what, yada yada. Sometimes you'll have people that apply that it works well to put them into like a combined group, which is sort of a note that I had made here. But once I have that sorted, then comes the fun part. And with Ciderfest, this was sort of unique because I had never seen so many applications before. And I had already resigned myself last year that, for those of you who might remember Ciderfest 2018, that was the first convention I was ever officially a part of the music staff on. I was sort of low level working for some really talented people who then sort of moved on and passed the torch to me. But Ciderfest 2018 was music themed. It was all about the concert. The concert was sort of like what they were going all out on. And I always felt that they made a statement in 2018 and said, look, music's important and we care about it. So even though the theme in 2019 was the holidays, I still wanted to run with that. Ciderfest is now the place to be for music. So I definitely worked as hard as I could on this convention because I wanted that to be true. And when all the applications came in, let me do a quick count real quick. We got 41 applications, and then I think there's a note somewhere later that someone else applied after that. But over 40 applications for music is insane. For those of you who've been to Pony concerts, you know that there's well under 40 people who get to perform. And even in the case where you get a lot of time for the concerts, like, that was insane. And coming off of the last BronyCon, I really wanted to go big with the acts. But I remember looking at these apps just trying to pick who was going to play. And like I had like moments where I was just like raging because the truth of the matter is, like, I would like about that many people to perform, and at the end of the day, you could probably fit about that many people. But I digress. The point of this page is to sort out all of the performers and sort of rank them based on how good of a performance we think they would do. And real quick, I want to give a shout out to Zol, for those of you who might know him. He came on as my assistant for Ponyville Ciderfest, so whenever I'm talking about, like, oh, I did this and I looked at this, really what I mean is Zol and I both did this together. Since it was such a big thing, Charlie wanted me to have an assistant to train just in case I was ever unable to do something. So quick shout out to Zol for his help with this. In any case, so I go through all the applications, and Zol and I together would sort of rank them based on how good of a performance we thought they would have. With 4 being the top score, meaning like absolutely you should accept this performer or this act, this group, what have you. 3 being, yeah, they're really good. They absolutely will put on a great show, but prioritize the 4s. And then, you know, from there you've sort of got, you know, if we need them, we can have them, and yeah, maybe these people aren't quite ready, to perform. And what was insane with Ciderfest is, I mean, there were so many talented acts that applied that early on when putting the concert together, I would just stare at this page and be like, I have to, like, there are people who scored 4 that I have to cut because we just don't have enough time or space unless we wanted everyone to have like a 10-minute set, and I would never do that. It was nuts. So I'm sitting there just like, well, I could do this and I could do this and that'd be cool, but then I'd have to cut these people. It was really infuriating. The second thing I do with this page is that I will take the part of the application that they said what they would need in terms of financial compensation or just benefits from the con. That could be, they might need a flight provided, or they might ask for a flight to get to and from the con. If they're driving, they might ask for gas money. If they don't have a hotel room booked or they can't afford to, you know, they might say they need or would prefer to have a shared room with other musicians. There's a spot for appearance fee. And then typically what I do is there were actual amounts of money here where I estimate about what I think it would cost for each performer to stay, or what it would cost to bring them in as a musician. And one of the references I had is that the convention gets hotel rooms to share for musicians based on the block rate. And so if you have $154 per night, then you put 5 musicians in a shared room for 4 nights, you just multiply that by 4/5, and then that's effectively what it would cost for a musician to have a shared room. And then you pile on gas and flight and yada yada, and you come up with how much you think it would be for them to perform, as well as how badly you want to get them. And so once that's done, so a nice thing about conventions that Charlie runs, big shout out to Charlie, I love you, thank you for having me, is that he will, once applications close for musicians, he will put out a survey to anyone who bought a sponsorship, with all the musicians that says here's all the musicians, you can check any of them, there's no limit, but who do you want to see? And he keeps that open for a week or two, depending on how close we are to the con already. And once that closes, he'll send it to me, and I can see who did the sponsors really care about. And I've whited them out so as to keep anonymity. But you can kind of see that you have some people that sponsors really like, some that are sort of in a mid-zone, some that maybe they haven't heard of or they're not too keen on. Usually I find that a lot of the lower voted ones are just people that sponsors really haven't heard of before. And luckily, I go through the applications and I know pretty much all of the musicians who apply already. So even if sponsors don't know them, I know them, and I won't put a lot of weight into whether or not they didn't get votes or if they did. Mostly what the sponsor survey does to me is it shows me like who are the top billed acts, who are the ones that are going to bring in the people who are really helping to fund this con. And it's important to take that into consideration and sort of make sure that the people who allow me to do what I do get at least a little bit of what they want out of it. So I'll use that to ultimately determine who gets to play. I have a tab in here. So the next thing that happened with Ciderfest. Hang on, I'm checking. Has there ever been a time when you denied a musician due to time and other stuff? Do you feel bad about it or could have done more? So, good question, Drummer Shy. This happens at every convention. No matter what, the part I hate the most is actually sending out the invitations and the rejections, because without a doubt, there's usually like at least 5 to maybe even 15 performers that we just couldn't fit in, or we just didn't have enough in the budget to bring in, that I would absolutely love to have brought in. As you'll see once we kind of move on, there were 2 nights of music at Ciderfest 19. We easily could have done 4, and it would not have lost any quality at all. I firmly believe that. There were so many people that I wish we could have had that applied that there just wasn't space to bring in. I was originally going to add a second super band of 4 more acoustic musicians. That ended up being like the final cut for the final roster, just because we already had enough acoustic acts. It balanced things. They're harder to sound check. There's a bunch of things that go into it, but without a doubt, every convention, it sort of ends up like that Schindler's List scene where like you send them out and you're just like, could I have done more? I could have done more, but the honest answer is I'm doing my best, and what we get is what we end up with. So the next thing that happened, and we were still, let's see, at this point, it would have been just after BronyCon, so we're in about early to mid-August. Charlie asked me to submit a budget proposal so that he could kind of look it over and determine how much money to allocate towards bringing in musicians. And so none of these numbers actually correlate to anything I want to point out. These are just random numbers that I put as placeholders, sort of to respect the privacy of the con. I don't want to give away certain numbers and get people all riled up. This is literally just like a random number generator of 1 to 1,000 for all of these. Just pretend they're the real numbers. So what I did is when Charlie asked for a budget, I sort of came up with a couple, right? So I already knew we have an insane amount of talent that wants to play. Using just that alone, I know that we can put together like a Brony Palooza caliber lineup. And so I'm now like, all right, let's make this as good as we can. Let's keep that Ciderfest 2018 music is alive and well and important, and people love it. And Ciderfest is the place to play. Let's make that happen again. And so I devised. There's 2 plans on here. I think I ultimately might have done 3. But I came up with like an aggressive, almost dream lineup. Not necessarily a final lineup, but sort of like, here's the people that I think are the top level talent with roughly the amount of time I think we would be able to allocate them, and how much I think it would cost to bring them in. There were actual real numbers here instead of, just sort of guesses. And there were 2 acts that kind of stuck out as being really expensive, but I also knew that they were probably they were among like the biggest draws, especially for sponsors, but just in general to get people into the concert. So knowing that they were expensive but also worth it, I sort of made these diagrams that were like, all right, so this is sort of like top tier. This will be an amazing concert. Like, can't do any better. But it's also going to cost like the X infinity amount of money to do it. Realizing that that's a little bit more than we typically have, if we just omitted like expensive person or band or DJ or whoever it was, and put in someone cheaper, then, the cost would go down by this much, and et cetera, et cetera. But still knowing that was kind of a lot, I was like, all right, this is sort of more along the lines of what we normally have to spend. And so, we can do it'll be a great show, on a budget. Cons don't have infinite amount of money. I can only imagine what running, like the budget actual department of everything is like. I imagine it's a nightmare. So, assuming that I'm getting way ahead of myself and that's too much of a dream, here's, a much more budget efficient lineup and what that would look like. I still have big acts A and B on here, and then I can also omit them for other cheaper acts, and this is, there were actual amounts here. And so I send that to Charlie, and I remember I had a number that I was expecting to get as a total budget, and he came back with a lot more than that, and I am eternally grateful for that. And he said, all right, let's go more on the aggressive side, let's do it. And I was like, heck yeah, here we go. But then it becomes a case of bringing down all of the musicians that were in here into one actually final lineup. So at this point, I start talking to the AV lead. Shout outs to Lost Disc, who's always incredible to work with and always very smart and helpful. At this point, it's time to figure out who goes on the lineup. And like I said, I had a hard time narrowing it down because normally I find with some smaller conventions, especially earlier in 2019, you only get X number of people who apply. And of them, like a portion of them are like, yeah, you would almost always accept these people because they're tried and true and they're great and they're great to work with. They always put on a top level show. And then you sort of fill in the remaining slots from there. With Ponyville Ciderfest, we didn't have that. It was literally, we have too many of those automatically always accept these people that we couldn't even fit all of them. And so I had to figure out, like, how do I determine which of those don't play? And so, not that this was purely what I went off of, but I developed a chart of people who had performed at similar-ish cons. Charlie runs Whinny City, the Whinny City PonyCon, as well as last year, if you recall, there was MLP, MSPF. And those are all sort of generally in the same close proximity to Milwaukee area. BronyCon, it's East Coast, but it's I still expected plenty of overlap, especially because it was the last BronyCon of people who came there. And I included Ponyville Ciderfest 18 and HarmonyCon in its first year to say, like, all right, these are probably who most of the people coming here, these are probably the cons they've been to most. So I looked at all the different artists that applied and which of those cons they had played. And I sort of determined, like, if they've been playing a lot, then as much as I hate it, I'll probably bump them off or put them on a wait list, sort of have them as backups, and bring in some newer people to change it up. My first sort of working lineup for Ciderfest looked almost identical to the Bronypalooza lineup from 2019. Obviously, we couldn't have as many musicians, but most of the ones on there had just played 3 months prior at Bronypalooza, and I was like, we can't just have the same lineup. That's bad for diversity, but also then it just becomes the same concert that they just saw. And so that was when I developed this chart, and I changed things around. I talked things over with Zoll, talked things over with the AV lead, talked things over with the person in charge of scheduling the main events hall and just scheduling in general. And so once I knew how much time we had for sound check, what we needed for the gala that Charlie Conventions do on Friday, and once I knew how late we could go, then we could finally put together the final lineup, which you'll see here. I didn't omit the artists this time because this was what we went with. This was the actual lineup. You can look this up. I'm not surprising anyone by showing this. And so in the process of coming up with this lineup, a couple interesting things happened. Because like I said, there was so much talent that I hated having to cut people. And so I talked things over with some other prominent people in the music community about what to do. I always try to get second opinions whenever I might be unsure on something, because I have a lot of trust in people like Lycan and Exploding Pony Toast, as well as a few others who have that kind of experience and who can give me a different point of view and sort of like help me feel confident that what I'm doing is right. And so big shout out to Exploding Pony Toast, because I believe it was him who suggested both combining John Kenza and Loophoof, as well as TCB and Nevermorn. So by having these back-to-back sets, I could fit more talent in. And I also feel like back-to-backs offer this like cool opportunity for multiple people to play off of each other within a set and sort of make it more fun than if they had just played separately. That's not always true. But with so much talent at stake, I thought it would be really cool to be able to do that. And so I reached out to them and I was like, would you be up to do this? And all of them were like, yeah, absolutely, let's make it happen. And it was awesome. So that was sort of what we did, is from there, once we have the people that we want to bring in and how long that we're ready for them to play, then we got to set up when they play and make sure that it all balances out and things work well. So we got to figure out sound check and make sure that whatever time we have for it is going to be enough. And the answer is that it never is, but we do our best. And so Friday night was the gala, which luckily doesn't require a whole lot of sound checking because you've got people like Vocal Score, who's amazing to work with, very quick. Just does the piano make music? Boop. Yep. Perfect. Can I sing into it? Quick 2-minute check. All right, I'm good. I'll see you at 7. Oh, yeah, okay, I rhyme. all the musicians that I work with hate that I do this, but this is just visually how I like it. I do the concert in reverse order because when I pioneer it, I generally work backwards because I sort of know who I want to headline and who fits well at the end of the night, etc. And so I have a tendency to sort of work back from there. So this is just how I visualize things. Apologies to anyone that offends, which is, I think, everyone. But I digress. I start from down here and work up. We work to make sure that so there's a coordinator who helps run the gala, and so I will oftentimes talk to her and make sure that she's good with how things are set up. They always do dance lessons, and so we bring in a gala DJ to make sure that there's appropriate music and sort of to keep things paced well. We also got Forever Free Brony to play, who's always fantastic. I know that the title of the panel is Tales from a Concert Manager, so here's a quick tale. Anyone who was at BronyCon 2019, after the convention was over, for those of you who recall who might have been there was the first ever Mayhem, which was awesome, just down the street. And I was hanging out there, and I ended up talking to Forever Free Brony for a little bit. And he mentioned how he likes playing sort of like gala type events, like sort of more coordinated, less chaotic than like a rock concert. A lot more sort of melodic, calmer based music. He mentioned that he sort of prefers playing those, and I was like, "You're telling me you'd prefer to play a gala? Perfect. I've got the perfect gig for you." And that was sort of how we ended up having him play the gala in what was already a very crowded lineup. I see people mentioning Mayhem. I do help out a little bit with Mayhem since I know a lot of musicians, and because I'm the one who sees the applications ahead of time. While Brownie and to some extent Prince Whatever would be putting together these things, especially Mayhem 2, which happened the Sunday of Ciderfest, I was able to relate some information to them to say, like, they were wondering who they would have available to play. I was able to go through and say, like, oh, well, these people applied. These people, like, might not quite get on or definitely could use more. You should reach out to them and see if they want to play. That's sort of, my role is sort of, I'm not necessarily, like, officially a part of Mayhem. I sort of will stand on the side and help however I can. I can also help sort of coordinate equipment since I know who's going to be at the con and what we're going to have. Hopefully that answers your question. In any case, so we set the lineup, try to make it fit everyone's needs and whatnot. The theme for Nightmare Nights, jeez, I'm reading this right here. The theme for Ponyville Ciderfest 19 was holiday themed, specifically pony holiday themed. And so ahead of time, Charlie had let me know that Friday night was sort of going to be, anyone can play any holiday songs they want to go along with the theme, but Friday was sort of more like a Nightmare Nights theme. And then specifically, they wanted to make sure that for the Christmas New Year's Eve theme on Saturday, that we had a countdown to that New Year's Day sort of theme event. And so when working on the Saturday lineup, I had to make sure I had a musician who could incorporate some sort of countdown right when it hit midnight. And thankfully, we had Seventh Element, who is always the best to work with, just the coolest person. Love you, Seventh Element. I talked to them ahead of time. I was like, we've got this thing we got to do. Would you be able to put together just a little thing so that at midnight we could count it down? And I timed a set to end at midnight. And those of you who were there know that that is not what happened. What ended up happening, here's another tale for you, was that, as is inevitable with just about any time you're running a concert, we were about luckily, we were only 15 minutes behind when it got to Seventh Element's sets. But he had 45 minutes, and they had planned for 45 minutes, but was starting at about 11:30. So somewhere around here during the night, when we knew that it was going to be a little bit off, I talked to Seventh and was like, "Is there a way that at 11:59 you can start the countdown? We'll do the little thing, and then we'll go back and finish your set." And Seventh was a trooper about it. Total pro. Did that exact thing. Once it hit 11:59, they flipped the switch. A thing came up on the screen that was like a 60-second countdown. It hit midnight. They played a fun little thing. Vocal score came out and did a little acoustic cover of Days Gone By, which is just the most gorgeous song. Charlie got party poppers and like New Year's hats for everyone. So while we were getting ready for it, I got to go through the crowd and hand out all of those. It hits midnight. We have like a big fest. And then, 10 minutes later, Seventh Element gets to finish their set. It's a great time. Making sure I'm not missing any comments or questions. Yeah, so, and I know there's some questions I haven't addressed yet, and I'll get to those at the end. That's sort of, you get that line, once you have sort of the lineup that you think is ready, then you actually get to the part where you start finalizing things, right? So we haven't even accepted these people yet. What happens next is I set the final budget to make sure that we don't mess anything up. Actually, that's all right. I can keep that. These are the... So we figure out who needs a hotel room and allocate the costs to figure out what that ends up being worth. I think we ended up having 6 shared rooms for Ciderfest 19, which is like insane. Usually it's like 2, maybe 3 at most. But like I said, we wanted to go big, and Charlie gave us everything we needed so that we could. And I'm so glad that we were able to. So I put that together, figure out the total amounts, organize who gets what they need, how to get it to them. Can figure like the PayPal and send that to Charlie so that he can put the contracts together and send all of that out. It's a whole thing. It takes time. It's so much fun. Yeah, so that's the final budget, at which point we can finally send out, here's the email list for the people who get accepted. Then I have sort of certain acts that I want to keep close on standby in case people have to drop, which happens all the time. Sometimes, things come up, or people get sick. Might talk about that later. You know who you are. What have you. It's always good to have some acts on standby in case there's an emergency and you got to throw someone else in last minute. And then you have the people that, as badly as you wish you could put them on. I mean, honestly, I probably wanted like this amount of people to be accepted in addition to everyone up here. It's just not something that could happen. Sucks, but that's how it works. And then that gets finalized. Charlie gives me the final okay, and then we send out the acceptances and whatnot. And as people accept, I start a Discord server for the musicians of each con so that we have them all in one place and it's easy to relay information in real time, both to prepare for the con as well as while the con is happening. And so I'm not going to show that because who knows what's in there at this point. But as musicians send emails back saying, I accept, your compensation is enough, I will do it, I'm excited, let's make it happen. I add them to the Discord server, and we start planning for what ultimately becomes the actual concert. I get the PayPal information, and they send out the stipends and whatnot. And then it becomes a case of, all right, we know who's going to play, So now we got to figure out how it's going to be done. Ciderfest 19 was insane because we had so many performers playing different things. There's always going to be a limited sound check, and there's always going to be a lot of equipment. And so the next big thing that I was working on through probably the end of September and most of October was how do we get this set up so that it's as efficient as possible, changeovers between acts are as quick as possible, sound check is as smooth as possible, which feels like an oxymoron because that's never a thing. So this is sort of just a general setup of what equipment do we need for the acts on Friday, when do we need it, who's using it, same thing for Saturday, where's it coming from, are we going to need it, is this enough? I'll make some notes for myself. At one point, so Claire Corlett, who voices Sweetie Belle, was a special guest at Ciderfest 19. And so we knew ahead of time that she had a special event going on the Saturday night during soundcheck, and she wanted to have a keyboard so that she could play for it was a sponsored event. And so that was one of the things I had to make a note of, like, let's make sure we have an extra keyboard. I have maybe a fun story about that I'll save for extra time, because I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but there were a couple of miscommunications. We got it. It happened. It was fine. But there was a little bit of yelling. And then from there, it's just talking in the Discord servers, making sure that everyone's ready and knows what they're doing. They never do. But whatever, that's part of being a concert manager, is understanding that musicians are not the smartest people in the world. And sometimes you got to poke them with a cattle prod to make sure that they're where they need to be. I saw a question from Nevermore. What do you do when an act doesn't show up in time? Luckily, I almost never have this issue, although I did have that at Ciderfest. The one of the acts, I guess I won't name them, there was a band that was going on to play, and one of the performers was not backstage about 5 minutes before they were going to go on. And you can't really introduce them because they can't really play until they're all there. So I checked all around backstage, could not find this person. Booked it out into the main hotel area, was looking at the musicians table, wasn't there, kind of ran down to the lobby, could not find this person. I'm scanning the elevators. I think I ran back into the panel rooms, fly back upstairs, run around by where the Renegade stage was, cannot find this person, run back to backstage. Now there's one song left before I have to introduce the next act. Cannot find this person. I'm panicking. I'm out of breath. I go back out into the crowd, and I'm just getting up in people's faces. Are you this person? Are you? Nope. Going around. Finally, with a minute to spare, I find him sitting cross-legged in the back of the room just watching. And I believe I said something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" And this person just looks at me like, "What?" I'm like, "You're up now!" And then they got up and went backstage, and I went back there and had about 5 seconds to cry on the inside, liquid pride. And then the act finished, and I went up, and it was nothing had happened. It was all right, here we go. It was a lot of fun. It's so much fun. That's what happens when an act doesn't show up on time. I had another at HarmonyCon this year, 2020. There was someone performing, and I knew they had a guest coming up to sing on a song, and that guest was not backstage 2 songs before, or they weren't even in the room 2 songs before it was time to go up. And so I'm messaging them on Discord. I'm messaging anyone that might know them. Are you with this person right now? Do you know where this person is? Turned out they were asleep in their car out front. But luckily, some of the people that I messaged had this person's phone number and started like spam calling them, and literally like as the song before they were supposed to be in the next one was ending, right before the song that they were supposed to be in was going to start, this person shows up backstage, and I'm like, oh, okay, we're good now. It's fine. Everything is fine. It's gonna be okay. Thanks, Evershade. Thank you for the picture. I digress. I guess the only other thing with Ciderfest to go over was the week ahead of time is, I have to imagine, the most stressful for everyone who's involved with running a con. But me specifically, it got real crazy because I had to try and remember the order that this happened in. I don't think anyone dropped the weekend before, but I think it was the Tuesday. So the con starts on Friday, right? I drive up on Thursday. Tuesday, I'm leaving work, and I get a message on my phone from one of the performers. A lot of you probably know who this is, but I won't say just in case. That was something along the lines of, I'm in the hospital about to get emergency surgery. My group can't make it. And there was I was just I stared at it for a couple minutes. And I was like, I mean, I guess there's not a whole lot I can do about it. We just gotta divert to plan B. But luckily, I started talking to some of the bandmates, and they were like, hey, we still want to go, and we have a different project we could do that we could still use most of that time for. For future reference, always be backstage before your set and not in the audience. Yeah, that's a good point. Always be backstage and not in the audience before your set, or I will scream at you, as I've already shown. That's a good point. In any case, back to the act. I talked to members of the band, and we were able to organize it so that they could do a different type of show with that time slot. And actually, I think we ended up reducing it a little bit to save time because they only had so much content. I don't fully remember. But it ended up working very nicely and sort of added a new dynamic to the show that we weren't initially planning for, but that, wouldn't have been there had things have worked out differently. I'm going to go back to the lineup again just so that it's there. So that happens Tuesday. On Wednesday, one of the members of another act was supposed to get a bus from Canada down to my apartment, and we were going to drive up to the con together. And I got a message saying that they had been turned away at the border because Canada has very weird laws about coming to America to perform. Apparently, the golden rule is don't tell them you're coming here to perform. You're going to an event with your friends or something. I don't know. Look up the laws. I'm not a law guy. But he just straight got deported back home, and that was that. So we had to adjust one more time and take care of that. And so we alerted the group that they were going to perform with, and they had to adjust their show. It was great. It was a fun time. I love it. And that's sort of just like what the week leading up to the event is like. I typed up itineraries for every musician. When I got to the con, I gave those to registration to make sure that they handed out so that the musicians had them and knew where they were supposed to be. You work with the person who schedules all the panels and make sure that there's a musicians panel and that you have the time needed. I don't think, with a lot of cons, if you're running late, it can become an issue of you might have to have a hard cutoff. And so it's always important to schedule in enough leeway so that you don't ever have to stop your final performer. And luckily with Ciderfest 19, we didn't have that issue. We had the room until 2 a.m. was sort of like the hard cutoff. But luckily, that Saturday, for those of you who remember, once it became Sunday and hit 2 a.m., it was daylight savings time, and so it jumped back to 1 a.m. And so while talking to the AV lead ahead of time, I was like, hey, so since we have the room until 2 and 2 becomes 1, we can schedule like an extra hour on Saturday, right? And she was like, my AV staff works really hard, and the amount of time we're already doing is a lot. So if you can convince the board guy to stay, I guess. And so I had a good artist commission a picture of his OC so that he would agree to it. But in the end, I think we still only scheduled it till 2, and we used the rest as leeway time. I have this area down here because originally we had scheduled things later for the Saturday. We thought soundcheck was going to be 5 to 7:30, and we found out that things changed, and that wouldn't work, and it was too late. So everything gets bumped up half an hour. There were parentheses around 4:30 because there was a panel before it, but it tended to let out early, so it was like, be there at 4:30, and then as soon as we're ready, we're going to go. And then Sunday night it was on to Mayhem 2. So that's sort of everything about setting up the con. If there's something I didn't touch on, go ahead and ask questions in the Discord. Since I've got about 10-15 minutes, I want to make sure that I get to those. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit and sort of just go through and make sure that I've got everything. Also, I want to make sure, quick shout out. I had mentioned that I work on BABScon. I think in the panel description, I said I was the lead for BABScon. I'm co-lead with Pinkaboo. Big shout out to Pinkaboo because she was the lead and then brought me on to co-lead with her. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't taking credit for Babs as of 2020. A lot of that was her. She did all the foundation work, and I just kind of came on and made some suggestions. Love you, Pinkaboo. You're amazing. Yeah. Anyway, questions. Going back up top. I got drummer shies already. Do you take bribes, and what is your standard fee? I don't take bribes. However, if you have something really cool that you want to do, or you're concerned that I might not be aware of, like, your potential for a stage show, I definitely encourage you to like reach out and direct message me or video chat with me and tell me like what your idea is and what you can do and what you want to do. I don't take bribes, but I can definitely be convinced that maybe it's your time to have a chance, or you would do well with another act if you wanted to combine it, etc., etc. Lycan asked, what are your feelings on having mystery skulls for Babs? So back in, I think it was December, convention management for BABScon had said that there was interest in mystery skulls performing. And my answer now is still the same that it was when they first brought it up, which was I don't know how to feel about it. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm very big on like pony music, and I know Mystery Skulls is sort of pony tangential, but also like one of the biggest names you would ever see at a PonyCon. And so I wasn't really against it, and I wasn't really for it. I didn't really know how to feel about it. BABScon for 2020 wanted to make a big point to say that we care about music and we want to have a really good concert. And so, in a way, I think that would be a really good way to make sure that people came to it. I know the DJs that we were going to have open for Mystery Skulls were, top tier, would have been amazing, and probably a good chance to introduce them to some people who were only there for Mystery Skulls. I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways you could feel about it, and as a result, I sort of just was in the middle, like, there's some good and there's some not quite as good. But I was never like outspokenly against it. And when it was ultimately decided that it would be good for the con, as a concert manager, you go with it. And so you'd sort of just focus on the good. And definitely there was a lot of upside to having Mystery Skulls. So that's sort of how I felt on it. Do you have any funny, memorable stories from post-con musician dinners? Really quickly, I got to play the gala at Everfree Northwest 2018, which was a lot of fun. It was the first time I ever got to play with a band live at a pony convention. And the Sunday night after the con, it was organized that all the musicians were invited to go into a big group to the really nice restaurant that's right next to the hotel. And it was a lot of fun. Some of the earlier Luck Rock memes were born at that dinner. That was when I became Beppis Horse. You can check with me later if you want to know the story behind that. But when I was at that musician dinner, I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. This must be a tradition for like every pony convention. This must just be a cool thing that the musicians do. I later found out after I started doing that for all the cons that I was a part of, that was just a one-time thing. No one really ever does that. But now it's a tradition just because I misunderstood it. The first story that comes to mind, I'm sure I could come up with a lot of them. But I want to get to some more questions. The biggest story that comes to mind for me, oh, you know what? No. Ponyville Ciderfest 2018. The big music con. We had 40 musicians in one way or another who are somewhere between 30 and 40 who were actually like playing at the con, whether it be on main stage or the Renegade stage. And I knew a lot of them left on Sunday. So I set up a musician's dinner at a nice restaurant within walking distance. For the people who were left. And I was sort of estimating that about half of them were still around and would probably want to go. So I called the restaurant early in the day Sunday. And I said, yeah, I've got like 15 to 20 musicians. Is there a way we could, get a reservation for tonight? And they were great to work with. And they were like, yeah, just give us like the accurate number when you're on your way over. And, we'll go from there. And what I didn't realize was that everyone and their brother was going to everyone was going to invite like their best friend and their brother to the musician dinner. And so by the time we lined up in the lobby to get ready to go over, there was a head count of 40 people. And I was like, oh boy, not sure how this is going to work. And so we started walking that way, and I called the restaurant. I was like, so listen, got 40 people, which is a few more than I said. Whatever we need to do to make that work, if you got to split us up, that's fine. If we need to wait, that's fine. We just, want to, eat generally as a group, but like, good manners, please work with us. And the restaurant, I wish I could remember what it was called. I'll have to look it up later. They were so good about it. We had to wait for a little while, but like as stuff became open, they slid stuff together, and we ended up breaking up into 3 groups. But what was fun about that dinner is that when you have 40 people walking through the streets of Milwaukee, the lobby of this place was not that big, so we couldn't wait in there, but it was a nice night out. So there were about 40 of us standing outside. And it's sort of become a little bit of a musician dinner tradition now that we lined up outside the doors and we did a tunnel so that just people leaving the restaurant who were like by and far not people that knew who we were or why we were there would come out, and then we'd all just have our hands linked up in a tunnel. And as they'd go out, we'd just cheer them on, and they'd run through this 40-person tunnel. And it was like so well received that like the people leaving the restaurant were like all smiles running through it. Even like the staff at the restaurant were like taking videos of us. So that's my favorite story. I love doing that. It's so much fun. And I feel like it's a good reflection of like who we are as a fandom to like spread that joy. I'm going to go a little bit rapid fire because I've got about 2 minutes left. What was your favorite concert that you helped put together and be a part of? That was HarmonyCon 2020. Was so insanely amazing that like I'm still sort of in disbelief that we made it happen. Shout outs to everyone on the staff. Shout outs to everyone who played. Like, if you can find some footage of it, eventually it'll be uploaded to the HarmonyCon YouTube. It was insane. It was mind-blowing. At the end of the convention, when they announced HarmonyCon 2021, people were saying, like, and we're going to go even bigger with the concert next year. And I was like, yeah, sure, that's a thing that we can just easily promise. But we're going to try. I answered that one. Do you accept riders that band acts give you? If so, any weird requests? I really don't get riders so much. It might be a case where someone's like, "Oh, I want to bring my fiance," and then we can make that work out with like a shared room or whatnot. Sometimes they'll ask for an appearance fee, and I generally find that off-putting. But depending on who they are, probably work with them. Will DJ Luckrock ever come back? I'm supposed to be the DJ for the Whinny City Gala coming up this July. So, yes, permitted that happens. Was it the Benihana? It was not the Benihana. It was some kind of steakhouse, and I'll have to look it up later. Memorable time that you cried or got huge feels at a concert. Ciderfest 19 was the most stressful week of my life leading up to it. We had a musician almost die. He's fine now. We had people like getting deported. I thought I was going to lose my actual job that week because I was struggling with it. It was so insane. There was like minimal AV staff because there was another con that a lot of them that normally work were working in the Midwest. We had like everything going against us. It felt like I think I ended up playing like 26 songs that weekend with different acts. There was so much that like it was the most stressful week of my life. And during the Super Band on Saturday night, I got to hear two of my all-time favorite songs in the fandom. The first was Cyril the Wolf played Millennium Alone, and I had a few tears come out during that. And then Forest Rain played Great to Be Different, and that was when it really hit me, and I just like bawled. Like, if there's people like that took video of the audience during that act, I'm definitely over on the left side just like crying my eyes out, and it was amazing. So I'm almost out of time. So real quick, I'm just going to promote a couple things real quick. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got like all of my YouTube and Twitter, my personal Discord. If you go to my Twitter account, my pinned message right now is my personal Discord server. It's mostly set up. The whole point of it is that we stream episodes of the show. So if you haven't seen all of them, you can let us know, and we'll set up a time, and we'll like help you get caught up with the show. We're also just watching the show back in order if there's no one that has special requests. We're also sort of reliving the fandom in between, like looking up songs from the very beginning of like Equestria Daily. It's a lot of fun. The whole point of the server is that I believe that anyone that wants to watch the show should never have to watch it alone. So it's a lot of fun. Feel free to join that. It's a public server. I'm wearing my Ponies at Dawn shirt. New album drops next weekend, poniesatdawn.bandcamp.com. There will be a thing on Ponyville Ciderfest, Ponyville FM for a release. That's going to be awesome. If you have any questions, you can DM me on Twitter or Discord or wherever. I had a lot of fun. I'm surprised that this went by so quickly. I have so much more to talk about. Check out Horse Music Herald and Cider Party if you haven't already. Those are amazing promotional music accounts that I work for and get to do stuff on. Thank you guys for coming. If there's any questions still in the server, I'll try to answer them even if I get cut off. Yeah. Oh, people were asking stuff in the other panel, on the other stage too. Let me see if I can find any of those before. Subscribe to me on YouTube. I make music. I've got stuff coming out soon. I've got joke songs coming up soon. Second favorite genre of music. Ska punk is the answer to that. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm out. So thank you guys for coming. Stick around for PonyFest. More stuff. Check out the Renegade stage. It's been fun. See ya.